Hello there. Over the last week, we saw some fascinating research come out of the US around what people see as red and green flags in a relationship, particularly around their political viewpoints, although there were some other elements that came into play, like the fact that 90% of women and 91% of men found reading to be a big green flag. People who read are just generally better. That's how people felt about it. But when it came to political stuff, there were some interesting red flags that were thrown up. But the biggest one was around whether or not you identified as a MAGA Republican. 76% of women considered that to be a massive red flag, but only 59% of men considered that to be a red flag. As opposed to identifying as communist, 64% of men considered that a red flag. That's a bit strange. But of course, that doesn't necessarily equate to what would happen here because we don't have a huge amount of MAGA Republicans. But there were some other really interesting political viewpoints that came up, like the fact that you'll always have somebody who argues it's not just black lives that matter, it's all lives that matter. That was a red flag for 60% of women, but only 40% of men. And then there was things like if you listen to Joe Rogan or not, that was a red flag for 55% of women and 35% of men. Even identifying as conservative, 55% of women considered that a red flag. And that's fascinating to sit down and look at. And there are other little things that come up on here, like whether or not you watch reality dating shows, if you're into astrology, if you refuse to go and see the Barbie movie, all considered somewhat red flags by people. But what's really interesting about this is it gives us an idea that maybe not everybody thinks the way that we do. And it's really easy to forget that sometimes and get frustrated with people and their political viewpoints. What we tend to see on social media in particular is a bubble. It's stuff that's fed into us based on algorithmic learning of what we like and what we interact with. And it's really important, particularly as we go into an election cycle, that you understand that not everybody is going to share the same viewpoint as you. What's really important to know is that their perspective is just as valid as yours, and while you might not necessarily agree with everything they do politically, you need to understand where they come from for their decision making process. And yeah, trust me, I know how frustrating it can be when you feel like people are being really self destructive. But understanding where they come from, understanding their perspectives and what drives them is a really key way of making sure that while we have partisan politics, it doesn't become hard partisan politics that has a clear line down the middle and people not talking to, understanding, or interacting with each other because you don't agree with them politically. And while it might not necessarily be a red flag for you that somebody is into astrology, maybe it should be the sort of thing that you pay attention to ensure that when we go out and vote, you're voting knowing that you understand what it is that you believe in and what you want to see going forward in the future.